Hey, what's good? It's me, Lex, back at you with another Pathfinder video. This week, I'm doing a class overview for the Kineticist. Up front, the Kineticist is probably one of the most potent classes in the game. It's capable of doing a lot of things, particularly if you build it effectively, that other classes cannot match the efficacy of. But what it gains in its ability to fulfill the role that you've selected it for, it loses in basically all forms of versatility outside of what you built it for. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go through the 3 characters I've prepared for you today. These characters are a little simpler than usual, because I want to use them more as a platform to talk about the class, but I still, as always, want to be able to give examples of what these types of builds might look like. At level 2, I have Fleshbender, a level 2 Kineticist. This isn't meant to be like some kind of neat Kineticist. It's more so that all of the effects are kind of about being a support for your team, like closing over wounds, mending flesh. So I just thought that wanted to be clear there. No body horror in this Kineticist. Fleshbender is a water-wood dual-gate Kineticist. At level 5, I have Melting, who is a single-gate fire element Kineticist based around being scary on the battlefield and doing a whole lot of damage. And then at level 7, I have Fly, who is a single-gate air element Kineticist, whose whole thing is about movement and support, kind of. So here at level 2, we're going to go over, as usual, the basics of the Kineticist class. Every Kineticist gains access to base Kinesis, which is a 2-action ability that lets you either generate, move, or suppress some of your element. Generate creates some of it for its normal uses, move moves an existing piece of it, and suppress destroys an existing amount of this element. Unfortunately, suppress does not work on durable crafted goods like stone statues, metal locks, or wooden doors. But the other 2 work in any situation. Every Kineticist also gains access to the Elemental Blast. This is a 1-action ability that lets you attack either in melee range or at a set range increment, depending on your element. And you can spend a second action on it to add your Constitution modifier to the damage. Although if you do it in melee, you still add your Strength modifier as well. So this is essentially going to be kind of your bread and butter blast attack. It's about on par, I would say, with like the general median for attacks, which makes it quite good, especially when you take advantage of the range that it gives you access to. And then the last thing I can kind of tie up that all Kineticists gain access to is impulses. You have a kinetic aura while it's open, which it can be open from the moment you wake up. You have the ability to shape your elements using impulses. Elemental Blast and Base Kinesis are impulses, and this is essentially pulling magic, primal magic, to shape your element and command it. And then as part of impulses, you gain a kinetic gate, where at level 1 you can choose either a single element to focus on, which gives you a bonus effect whenever you use one of its impulses, or a dual gate, which gives you 2 different elements. And regardless of which you pick, you will have a single level 1 class feat, and then 2 additional feats that are only for impulses of your element. And the last thing that I want to mention before we get all too into it is that a lot of how your class is going to feel as a Kineticist is going to be based on the elements you choose. And then at levels 5, 9, 13, and 17, when you gain a Gates threshold, you can either choose to deepen your connection to the element you're already in sync with, or add another element to the ones you have control of. And your choices there and your choices of impulses in your feats are going to more or less determine how your character plays. And the one last thing I want to get into is that Kineticist is still a relatively new class. It has not gotten a lot of support since its release, which means I'm going to touch on it briefly with melting, but if you build a single element Kineticist, it is very likely going to play almost identically to a single element Kineticist of the same type that someone else has made. There just are not a lot of feat options. Anyways, let's get into the actual builds here. Level 2, Fleshbender, like I said, all about mending wounds, supporting the party. And I have not gotten into specifically equipment all too much on these different builds. I'll get into why in a moment. Fleshbender is a dual gate water and wood element Kineticist, which gives them access to shaping both water and wood, and taking the impulse feats at level 1 for Ocean's Balm. This allows you to touch a willing creature and heal them, and give them resistance to fire. And Fresh Produce, which allows you to spend an action, choose a creature in your kinetic aura, which that starts out down here, channel elements. This starts out as a 10-foot emanation, but it can eventually go up to a 30-foot emanation if you pick up a feat later. The selected creature gains a piece of fruit in their hand. They can eat it as an action, and they will heal. And this has some very good scaling, 1d4 plus 5. So after you get out of this very first level, where you only have 1d4 plus 1, this is going to start healing more and more and be very, very effective. Hardwood Armor gives Fleshbender here an armor of plus 3 AC bonus with a plus 2 dex cap that uses the normal armor progression for Kineticists because they only have light armor. And as well gives access to the shield block reaction with a shield that the hardwood armor feat grants you, which can save you a little bit of hit points if you have extra actions. Raise up your shield and use your reaction on a shield block. Using your reaction, as always, is very, very good. And finally, picking up Incredible Initiative, because if you're going to be, or actually not finally, I have one more impulse to go over here, Timber Sentinel. This is, in my opinion, especially since the nerf to Winter Sleet a few months ago, this is probably one of the strongest impulses that any Kineticist is capable of picking up. Timber Sentinel gives you the Protector Tree spell, but at will, and always at max rank. And it ends the previous one if you use it again. And Timber Sentinel is a tree you place down within 30 feet of you, and then any ally adjacent to the tree who takes damage from an attack, the tree takes the damage first. And so it can mitigate 10 damage at level 1, and then every 2 levels, so at level 3, 5, 7, as it heightens, it gains an additional 10 hit points that it can absorb. It's very, very good for damage reduction. And then Incredible Initiative rounds off this level 1 feat selection choice here, because being able to act first with Timber Sentinel means that you can absorb as much damage as possible. Being able to prevent damage is always going to be better than healing damage, because healing damage is a more difficult thing to do. Both Fresh Produce and Ocean's Balm have 10-minute lockouts. Battle Medicine has a 24-hour lockout. Potions consume resources, etc. Being able to keep people from going down as well with damage mitigation, very, very strong. And as you can see here, this is probably the most exaggerated form of it in this video, because the other two have gone for double general feats here. But Kineticist can feel like a very front-loaded class. There's a lot of selections to make at level 1, as you can see here. I have 4 class feats at level 1. Even though one of them is from the human ancestry, just having 3 is already quite a lot. It's a lot of customizability you can get at level 1. And having these 2 elements meant that there were a solid amount of choices. There were some damage choices here, of course, but I figured for Fleshbender, focusing on having these supporting impulses and then just using Elemental Blast for offense would function just fine. Then at level 2, just to top off Fleshbender here, we have Deflecting Wave. This is another way to use that reaction. If you take damage from acid, bludgeoning, fire, or slashing from an attack spell or other hostile effect, then, and you are not off guard against it, and you're aware of it, you gain resistance equal to your level, or double if it's acid or fire. It's a very solid effect, and can stretch the already quite large amount of hit points you'll have as a class with a Constitution key much further. And then Battle Medicine, of course, just to complete the theme here. And so here we can see the two elements, water and wood, working together. These are the two supportive elements in the sort of recovery and protection sense. And now that I've gone over Fleshbender and you have a little bit of context for the class as a whole, I want to go into the specialties of the elements in particular. As I move over to Melting, I'm just going to use Melting's selection here. Every element has its own effect on single gate, which kind of encourages you to build it a certain way. If you're going to choose a single element, it gives you a bonus, and then you can double down on it and get stronger. And so I think that this is a very good place to start if you're unaccustomed to Kineticist, to try and find out what element will sync well with your playstyle, or what playstyle interests you, and then pick an element depending on that. These impulse junctions happen once per round when you use a 2-action impulse, and they happen before the other effects of the impulse, unless noted otherwise. So, if you choose to be just a pure air Kineticist, then before or after the other effects of the impulse, you can either stride up to half your speed or step, and if you have a fly speed, you can fly up to half your speed instead. And so this kind of tells us that air is going to be all about moving frequently, moving freely, and it's hard to lock them down. When we get into earth, fragments of stone float around you, giving you a +1 circumstance bonus to AC until the start of your next turn. That's like raising a buckler, and you get that for free on top of your 2-action impulses. So that tells us that earth is going to be kind of about being tanky, and you can of course still increase that by having an actual shield even further, but this is freeing up your action economy by giving you half of what a shield would give you. Fire increases the damage die size of fire damage dealt by the impulse by 1 step. Fire impulses by default actually have a smaller die size than most of the other elements. They have a D6, and picking fire increases this up to a D8. But it's specifically combining this with other effects that can make pyromancy a very dangerous thing. And so this is kind of making it so that people who are not pyromancers can't get the potency out of fire that a pyromancer can. Metal, I have some thoughts on that I want to touch on a little bit later, because it doesn't have as much of an identifying theme as the other elements, but you get to choose acid, electricity, or piercing, and then until the start of your next turn, each time a creature touches you or damages you with an unarmed melee attack or non-reach melee weapon, it takes damage of the chosen type equal to half your level, with a minimum of 1. This kind of encourages you to get into the thick of it, be a target, and get hit a lot. That's about all there. Water. After the impulse's other effects, you can move one creature targeted by the impulse or in its area 5 feet in any direction, or 10 feet if it's in a body of water. This can't move the creature into the air. You can choose only a creature that's willing to be moved, that failed its save against the impulse, or that you succeeded at an impulse attack roll against. So this allows you to kind of be constantly manipulating the battlefield. It shows that you're kind of control-oriented. If a creature fails their save, when you're placing down some difficult terrain or just doing damage, you can move them out of the way as well for your other teammates. Maybe push them into a flanking position so that your allies don't have to spend their actions moving. And finally, wood gives you temporary hit points equal to your level that last until the start of your next turn. And this provides an immense amount of survivability, although in a different way than earth does. So now that we've touched on what all of the different elements are kind of about, we can look a little bit more into another specific build. Here, melting is my level 5 Kineticist example. Melting has picked up double armor proficiency to be able to wear heavy armor, just because I thought the idea of this big imposing plate armored figure spewing flames everywhere would be quite fun. You will have to, if using this build at level 19 when you gain light armor mastery, you will have to switch to light armor. There isn't any way out of the box to have your heavy armor scale at the same rate here with just the general feats. As for the impulses that melting has selected, single gate fire element for a pyromancer build. We have burning jet. This is a very useful utility impulse. It lets you stride up to 40 feet in a straight line, ignoring difficult terrain and not triggering reactions. And then at 6th level, this heightens and lets you stride up to 60 feet or leap up to 40 feet. And then at 10th level, if you leap into the air as part of that leap, you don't fall until the end of your next turn and remain airborne if you keep using it on subsequent turns. So it eventually turns into, if you've ever watched Avatar, The Last Airbender, at the very end of the show, where the Fire Lord is leaping around on gouts of flame. He like flings his body, and then he's in midair as he's like slinging his fire. And then he boosts himself back up. This is essentially what this is doing. You eventually gain access at level 10 to constant flight, although it's very action intensive if you're in combat, so look out for that. We also have Flying Flame. This is probably going to be one of your bread and butter options as a Kineticist. It allows you to create a tiny flame that flies from you up to 30 feet in a path you choose. This is just a 30-foot path, and you can wind it however you wish. This gives you a lot of versatility, although I think you'll find that very often the last enemy is going to be 5 feet too far. Either way, though, this very, very consistently guarantees that you'll be able to get 2 enemies with your Flying Flame. And usually, as well, this is going to kind of encourage you and push you into being in closer range so that you can take better advantage of that. And then every creature in the line takes a d6 of fire damage with a basic reflex save. We also pick up Weapon Infusion here. Weapon Infusion is a super duper solid feat. It's a free action that you can use directly before an elemental blast to choose a weapon shape, and you form your element into that weapon, basically, which changes the damage to your choice of bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. And you can add an additional trait or alteration depending on the form. If you're making a melee attack, you can make the attack either agile, give it the backswing trait, the forceful trait, the reach trait, or the sweep trait. And then if you're doing a ranged attack, you can choose to do a 100-foot range increment and a 30-foot volley, a 50-foot range increment and the propulsive trait, or a 20-foot range increment and the thrown trait. So this is opening up a lot of options for how to use your elemental blast, and more importantly for us as a pyromancer here, this is making sure that if we ever run into anything immune to fire, we still have an option. At level 2, we're going to be grabbing Extended Kinesis. This is a very fun feat. There are a lot of imaginative things you can do with this, as long as your game master is a little understanding of the fact that this is going to play more into the aspect of simulation of a world than it does specific particular rules. You can choose to either proliferate, regulate, or sculpt your element whenever you use base kinesis, in addition to the default options. If you proliferate, you get to fill the same square or adjacent square with your element, as long as there is some of it already there. And then it reacts to the environment naturally. And you cannot apply this to durable or crafted goods. Regulate, which works on almost all of the elements, but not every single one, changes the temperature of the element to make it colder or warmer. This lets you snuff out flames or turn water into ice or steam. And then after this change, the element cools or warms naturally unless you sustain it. And if it gets hot or cold enough, the GM lets you use it as an improvised weapon to deal cold or fire damage. And finally, Sculpt, which is only for earth, metal, and wood, allows you to reshape an existing element into a small object of a design you choose. It looks crude and artificial, but it can be used as a functional short tool or long tool once your base kinesis heightens. It's too fragile and artificial to be used as a weapon or have any monetary value. This opens up a lot as far as roleplay goes, but especially as far as mechanics goes. Regulate on its own here with fire. Fire, as you can imagine, might not be the most helpful element for general use in daily life, but even here, using extended kinesis to regulate fire, you can put out fires with the flick of your hand. It's a lot of fun. Intimidating glare, just to kind of build up this idea of like this big towering armored pyromancer. Fleet to gain some extra speed since we're going to be getting in close. Scorching column is an overflow impulse that conjures a cylinder of extreme heat. Each creature in the area takes fire damage with a reflex save, and then it also makes all squares in the column hazardous terrain until the end of your next turn, and you can sustain it up to a minute, with creatures taking 1 fire damage for each square, or each time they move into one of the squares. And then it heightens as well every 3 levels by a d6 of initial and 2 on the hazardous terrain. And you'll see in just a moment why this is actually very solid, even though at first look this is taking a lot of setup to do not a lot of damage. The overflow trait here means that when you use the impulse, your kinetic aura actually deactivates and you have to use an action to open it up again. So this is essentially a 4-action ability. But here at level 5, we're going to be revealing exactly what's so good about it. The gates threshold that you gain access to at level 5, level 9, level 13, and level 17, we're choosing Expand the Portal. This is the one where you kind of delve deeper into your elements options. Every element has an aura junction, a critical blast, an elemental resistance, a skill junction, and an impulse junction. The impulse junction is the one that we got for going single element. This is how you'd pick it up if you were going for multiple elements instead. But the critical blast gives options when you critically hit with your elemental blast. Elemental resistance gives you resistance and eventually immunity to your elements and a closely associated element. The skill junction gives you a status bonus to the listed skill and a skill feat related to it. And then the aura junction, the one that we're actually choosing here for fire, this gives you an effect within your elemental aura, that 10-foot aura that you have to have open to use your impulses. For fire, this is that enemies in your aura gain a weakness to fire from your fire impulses equal to half your level, with a minimum of 1. And this combines with the Scorching Column. So you can see here it's a first level impulse. We're level 5, so it gets 1 heighten. The hazardous terrain will be 3 damage per square. And if they're within our aura, because our aura junction is giving them a weakness of 2, then they're going to be taking 5 damage for every square they move into. If they're within our Scorching Column and within our aura. This is how we can kind of stack up a lot of damage. Our aura junction is going to be providing a significant weakness, and then we get into the extra feat. Every time you reach a gates threshold, it gives you a feat for an impulse feat for whichever element you chose. So since we chose to double down on fire, it gives us a fire feat, and this is one of the solid contenders for one of the better stance impulses, I think, in the Kineticist array. This is Thermal Nimbus. It's the Pyrokineticist initial stance feat. You choose cold or fire. You and allies in your kinetic aura gain resistance equal to your level to damage of that type. So, super solid already. 5 damage resistance to fire or cold chosen when you open it. And then any creature that starts its turn in your kinetic aura or moves into your aura during its turn takes damage equal to half your level of the chosen type. And elemental resistance from a gate junction is cumulative with resistance from thermal nimbus. This, though, means that in combination with the aura junction, because it's giving them a weakness to fire equal to half your level, and it's dealing damage equal to half your level, you're going to be dealing your full level in damage every turn to every creature in your aura, or every creature that enters your aura automatically. It's a lot of automatic damage, and being able to stack up the aura junction on top of your other impulses as well. You throw down a burning jet and the 2 enemies adjacent to you both take some damage, etc. It's a very effective close range pyromancer sort of feel. And I did want to touch a little bit, now that I've gone over overflow and stance impulses, I wanted to mention that the action that allows you to open your kinetic gate, I mentioned before briefly that you could just open it during your daily prep and leave it open all day. But when it does get shut down, which happens if you fall unconscious or you use an overload impulse, you use the channel elements action. It just requires that your kinetic gate isn't active, and it opens it. And as part of the action, you can choose to either use a 1-action elemental blast or a 1-action stance impulse. And so that means that as part of reopening your gate after putting down a scorching column, for example, you scorching column, pass turn, next turn, you channel elements to reopen your gate, and as part of that, you can turn on your thermal nimbus. You'll still have to spend an action sustaining that scorching column separately, but it means that effectively you get to compress a lot of actions down as you go. And as usual for subordinate actions, unfortunately, the elemental blast that you can get as part of channel elements is not going to be your next action. The next action will be channel elements, so unfortunately you won't be able to use weapon infusion with channel elements, but it is what it is. And now finally here at level 7 we have Fly. This is a single gate air element kineticist focused around kind of general team support and not healing, specifically generalized support. So we have the Bon Mot feat, which allows you to demoralize some will saves for some casters who can target that. Fleet for additional movement, because air really likes having high movement. Versatile blasts, because air is not capable of a lot of versatility. We're grabbing this to gain access to cold damage on our impulses. Aerial Boomerang will be one of our first impulse feats here. This allows you to toss out a 60-foot line. Each creature in the area takes some slashing damage with a reflex save, and then the boomerang stays in the final square of that line. And then any creature that ends its turn in that square has to save against the boomerang, so you can aim it sort of down at the ground to make it stop in a creature's square, and then they will have to leave that square or else take additional damage. And then finally, on your next turn, you can use a single action with the concentrate trait to cause the boomerang to come back to you, where it returns in a line from its square to your current location, doing the same damage. And then the impulse ends. You have to stay within the original range and have line of effect still. This is super solid, and especially when combined with a single gate air element, where you're able to move as you're tossing this out or after you've tossed it out. It means that you're very likely going to be able to hit multiple people every turn with the aerial boomerang. The damage can stack up a lot faster than you'd think. And then finally here, 4 Winds is a 2-action activity. Target up to 4 willing creatures within 30 feet of you. They can each stride up to half their speed. And if they have a fly speed, they can instead fly up to half their fly speed. And then at level 10, it increases to full speed. This is super solid for being able to reposition your party and take advantage of openings, and specifically because it's willing creatures instead of allies, this means that you can target yourself. You can move as well as part of this, which is super solid. At level 2, we're going to be picking up Whisper on the Wind. This is a boosted effect of the message spell, which is a cantrip that allows you to send private messages to people. It gives you a range of 500 feet at level 1 and only takes an action. It can only target a creature surrounded by air. And if you start your message with the target's name, you and the target don't need to be able to see each other, nor do you need line of effect. They just need to be surrounded by air. At 4th level, the range increases to a mile, and at 14th level, this increases to planetary and the plane of air. So this is an incredible way to get information across the world really, really fast, or through any sorts of informational restrictions. You know, you're in jail, you can still talk to someone a mile away at very low levels. This will depend on if this is relevant in your game, but it's still a super solid thing I want to point out, that Kineticist isn't all about dealing damage. There are definitely impulses, and I hope I touched on it as well, with base kinesis and extend kinesis. There's a lot that a Kineticist can do for utility. It's just that their utility doesn't usually extend outside of their element, as I hope has been clear to see. We also pick up Slippery Prey so that we can be harder to lock down in one place. We're also going to pick up Trick Magic Item, because I wanted to touch a little bit on Trick Magic Item and kinetic activation. Kineticist starts off trained in nature, and that on its own plus Trick Magic Item is a super easy way to get some scrolls and supplement your team's abilities, but you can also toss in a skill training somewhere like Arcana, pick up some scrolls, and support your team. You're obviously going to be using your actual Kineticist abilities for the majority of what you want to do and like all of your powerhouse options, but you are kind of a caster and you have options to dial into the actual full spell lists and use them very effectively to support your team. At level 4 here, we have Lightning Dash. This lets you shoot yourself forward in a 30-foot line. You can move through creatures, and you don't trigger reactions. And every creature you move through takes some electricity damage with a reflex save, and then you turn into your normal form. And then if you're in the air at the end, you fall unless you have a fly speed. So this allows you to kind of rocket yourself up onto like a shallow ledge, something like 10 feet up, 15 feet away, roughly. And the line increases as it heightens, as does the damage. We're also going to be gaining Catfall. We've been increasing acrobatics. This just means that we can use Lightning Dash to be a little bit more mobile. At 5th level, we're picking up Sense Allies because we're going to be picking up some invisibility options later. This just lets you detect where your allies are a little easier. We'll also be picking up the Air Cushion feat, as our Air Gate Junction is Elemental Resistance. This gives us resistance to electricity and anything with the air trait. And Air Cushion is a reaction when a creature within 60 feet is falling to slow their fall, and then they take no damage if they hit the ground with that slowed rate of falling within 1 minute. And you can't use it again while one is in effect. And at 8th level, it heightens up to double its range, and you can create cushions for up to 5 creatures with a single reaction. So this just means that the Air Kineticist is going to be able to protect the party from falling great distances, taking immense amounts of damage, etc. At 6th level, and this is why we picked up Sense Allies, or will be, actually, it won't be, because this only affects you. But I guess they're related. That was just my bad on that. I try not to worry too much about things like Ancestry feats, because I'm demonstrating the class. Either way, Clear as Air is a impulse that allows you, and only you, to turn invisible. You can sustain the impulse, and it ends if you use a hostile action. And then if you reactivate the impulse within 10 minutes of activating it the first time, it only makes you concealed instead of invisible. And then at 10th rank, it heightens so that it only makes you concealed until the start of your next turn when you take a hostile action instead of ending the impulse entirely. And at 16th level, taking a hostile action has no effect on the impulse. And there's actually something that I wanted to touch on here. Let me pull it up for you. The sustain action, we pull it over here. If an ability can be sustained but doesn't list how long, it can be sustained up to 10 minutes. So this can be sustained up to 10 minutes, and there's been much debate about whether the within 10 minutes, if that timer takes place when you first use the impulse or when the impulse ends. Really, this is going to be up to your table. I personally weigh in favor of the when you use the impulse, which means that you can cast this. Well, you can use this impulse, and as long as you sustain it for the full 10 minutes, you can basically vanish as soon as you reappear, even from the moment you gain the feat. You still have the restrictions, of course, that you will end the impulse if you stop sustaining it for any reason. So that'll be taking up your exploration activity. If you're in exploration mode, it'll be taking up actions in combat. And then if you use a hostile action, it ends or becomes weaker at higher rank. Effectively, though, this is going to give you a lot of versatility in your options for moving around. You get to become clear as air, and I think that it's a super flavorful action. We're also going to be taking Nimble Crawl. Since we're investing into acrobatics, we might as well take this. This is one of my favorite fun skill feats. This lets you crawl up to half your speed. If you're a master in acrobatics, as we are, you can crawl at full speed, and if you're legendary, you aren't off guard while prone. And then at 7th level, we pick up Kip Up, because you still take a penalty to attacks when you're prone. So being able to stand is a good idea. Now, I want to touch a little bit more and get a little bit deeper into specific roles that each element actually follows. Because I have a fair amount of experience with each of them, and now that I've gone over the 3 characters that I prepared for you, I want to get into it. Air, as you've seen, and as I hope I've demonstrated because it was actually in here, is all about mobility, it being hard to lock you down, and being able to support your team with a variety of sort of mobility or air-themed things. Carrying your messages on the wind, turning invisible, flying. Eventually you can give yourself and your whole team access to a better version of flight. It's a very, very solid element for that. Earth is all about kind of making yourself tankier. There are several ways to manipulate the terrain. I believe there is a feat that gives you a burrow speed as well, which is very interesting. Earth is, I think it definitely fulfills the role of being the tankiest element. As far as armor class goes, you can stand there and take a beating. Fire is the go-to damage element. You're kind of one-minded, and you have to be one-minded on it. You have to take the single gate and take the fire impulse junction and the aura junction to be a full-fledged pyromancer, but if you do so, you will find your damage values exceeding that of any other kineticist by a significant margin. But of course, it's going to be hard to find other things that you're capable of doing. Fire is very hard to twist into supportive roles much of the time. I'm going to save metal for last here and skip right over to water. Water is the control and support element. It has a lot of options that allow you to protect yourself or your teammates, whether through battlefield control or through actual healing. It has options for debuffing enemies, moving them around. Water is going to make you feel kind of in control of everything you're fighting, a lot more than some of the other elements will. Wood is another sort of counterpart to Earth. While Earth is the tanky offensive element, although it still has some certain aspects of more battlefield control and offense, Wood, I would say, is leans much more into the battlefield control and support, sort of tanky nature of things. And then finally, the metal element. I touched on it briefly. I have struggled since release to find ways to use metal that don't feel like I'm trying to exploit something. Let me make a new character here for you and show you what I mean. If I bring up Kineticist here and I select the single gate and metal, so the metal single gate impulse junction is that you get to do damage to creatures that hit you equal to half your level every time they hit you or touch you. So that's the same amount of damage that melting here is doing with the thermal nimbus, except melting also has the aura junction, which is doubling that damage. And that's automatic to all creatures in an aura, whereas this is only when you get hit. So the idea, of course, that this is encouraging you into is that you should get into combat. You want to be aggressive. You want to be maybe a little bit resilient too, so that you can take those hits. But when we look at what metal has access to, it's not exactly in line with that. Metal carapace is the exact same, if we go over here to Fleshbender, is the exact same as hardwood armor as far as the armor itself goes, except for the armor group being plate here and having the noisy trait, but the statistics are the same. And the only benefit is that you gain the steel shield rather than a wooden shield, although the heightening is, if we pull this up here, hardness by 1, HP by 4 on the hardwood armor, and on the metal carapace it's the same. It's hardness of 1 and HP by 4. And so the shield starts off stronger. Of course, steel shields are stronger base tools, but it doesn't scale any better. And additionally, if you take any damage from a critical hit, your armor disappears, and this lowers your AC dramatically until your next turn, usually probably by 2 to 3 points. Now, this isn't a deal breaker by any means, but like it makes it kind of difficult to want to get into combat. And then when you look at your other options as well, magnetic pinions lets you, as an overflow 3 action ability, attack 3 creatures within 60 feet of you. You gain bonuses if any of them are wearing metal armor or are made out of metal, and then they deal bludgeoning and piercing on a hit. Essentially the equivalent of a D8 of damage, though. And being able to target 3 creatures is not nothing, but now you're left without your armor again. And when you get up into the higher levels as well, the only things that ever really stand out to me that Metal Kineticist can do are things like exploiting plate in treasure. This allows you to replicate the effects of the clad in metal spell. Essentially, you take an element that you are, that in this case, that you are wearing or holding, and it gives you access to that metal for your impulses. And so there is this small exploit you can do, where if I pull it up right here, really quickly, the adamantine chunk, here we go. Or I guess it's not a exploit anymore. They're actually fixed in the remaster. These used to be level 0 items, so never mind. In this circumstance, however, the issue comes from the fact that Metal Kineticist puts in a lot of legwork to have not a whole lot of results. And it struggles as well with things like base kinesis here, where, say, suppress, you cannot use suppress on things like durable crafted goods, only natural forms of the element. And metal, as many of us are aware, is kind of not a natural element. Not in that it doesn't exist as its own, but it doesn't exist as metal plates in the wild. It exists as very, very thin distributions through rock. And so the extended kinesis for metal here, where you gain the ability to proliferate, this affects only natural forms of the element. Regulate, it allows you to heat or cool things, but not enough to fracture them. And sculpt, which allows you to reshape an existing element, although it's not specified here whether or not you could take something that is crafted to turn it into. And so the best option that I've been able to find for support that metal can get, and the one thing that I can solidly say it does better than any other element, is if you use base kinesis to generate an ordinary non-magical piece of metal, and specifically if your game master gives you access to some harder metals, like adamantine, for example, and then you can, as an action, throw it on the ground, and then for 2 more actions use base kinesis to proliferate that element out to fill its square. Then you can create a 5-foot cube of solid metal, which is very, very solid cover. It has a lot of hit points, a lot of hardness. It can be very good in that way. But I find that metal really struggles to hold its own against the other elements, and I just wanted to give that a little bit of a touch while I was talking about all of the different elements. Either way, no element is going to be a bad choice. They're all going to be kind of just determining your playstyle, whether you're running around, standing your ground, doing a lot of damage, kind of being close in combat, controlling the battlefield, or supporting your teammates while being hard to take down yourself. There's a lot you can do with Kineticist. I think that it's a lot more versatile than a lot of people give it credit for, because despite its lack of in-class versatility, it has a lot of options available to it depending on the element that it has, even with just normal base kinesis. And then finally, I mentioned at the very start that I wasn't going to be going over the gear, because Kineticist specifically is very, very simple. The only thing that you need as a Kineticist is you need your elemental gate attenuator. At level 3 and at level 11, you buy one of these to give yourself some bonuses. Other than that, you can purchase whatever you want to add to your build. So like, for example, with Fly here, trick magic item, you could be buying scrolls and wands, etc. Other than that, just buy some light armor to ensure that you have some good AC, and you'll do great. Anyway, so that's it for me. I'm a big fan of the Kineticist class. I don't think it's exactly one of my favorites, but I think it's a super solidly designed class. The only thing that I wish is that there were more feats to take advantage of, because if we click on Thermal Nimbus here, you can see that when restricted to only the impulse feats, which are the fun ones that do things, there are not a lot of options here. Though there were 3 options other than Thermal Nimbus for this level 5 slot, and one of them is only useful for elemental creatures. One of them is an overflow cone attack, and one of them is essentially the light cantrip. And it can feel very, very restrictive when building a single gate Kineticist to make it feel unique. But other than that, it's a super fun class. Thank you all for watching. I hope this was helpful to you. Leave a like if you liked the video, subscribe if you would like to see more, and toss me a couple of bucks on coffee if you want to keep the channel running. I will see you all next time. See ya. See ya.